Everybody, welcome back to the next episode. Today we have Desiree with us. Hi, Desiree.
Hey, Shane. So happy to be here.
Yes, nice to see you again. Actually, they were just at the Vegan Expo. We've seen them there, right? So, and the last name is, I didn't even ask how to pronounce it properly, so I'm going to let you do it properly.
Dupuis.
Dupuis. Yeah, I would have got it wrong when I looked at it. So I would have pronounced it wrong. So I'm glad I let you pronounce it.
There's no R. A lot of people say Dupree. I'm like, there's no R in Dupuis.
Right, totally. All right, so a little bit about her. She has over 20 years experience in brand development, storytelling, and creating the ultimate customer journey. So a little bit of importance in that in business, right?
Yes.
She is passionate about living a life of purpose and making an impact in the world by creating permanent, sustainable change. She has been living vegan lifestyle since 2008 and is proud to use her voice to advocate for animals as well as the planet. She is currently part of the leadership team for Cascadia, pronounce that right, correct?
Yeah.
And working as the VP of Sales and Marketing running Cascadia's consumer food brand Kove. She's also serving as chair of the international NGO. She has co-founded Reuben Shoe Society and is working on her own vegan fashion brand. She also holds a BCMO in international business from University of Victoria. Well, welcome again.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to speak about all things that I'm passionate about.
That's right. Me too. I'm excited to get the word out about all the things you're passionate about that change the world.
Yeah, meaningful impact.
100%. That's
yeah.
where it's at. So tell us a little bit about your history. Like how did you get to where you are today? And then let's start what you're doing today, the cliff notes of that version.
Okay, yeah, the cliff notes. I mean, it's hard, I'm 40,
Yeah.
almost 43. So it's like, how do you sum up a 20-year career? But essentially, I worked in CPG and consumer packaged goods for a wine company in 2008. And that's actually at that company is when I was talking to a coworker, and she told me that when we were getting a coffee that she was no longer drinking milk. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, I read this book called Skinny Bitch. And Skinny Bitch was written by two vegans. And so I picked it up on my way to Hawaii. And since that day, June in 2008, I went fully vegan. So my role working for this wine company helped me totally change my lifestyle. And then shortly after, I only worked for that company for a year and decided that, I saw the wall that my ladder was against, climbing the corporate ladder, and realized that I really wanted to have my own business. And so I joined with my best friend, and we launched our own insurance and financial services company. And so for 10 years, I ran an insurance business and was responsible for lead generation and marketing. And along that journey, she had been sponsoring a boy named Reuben in the Dominican Republic, and had actually had the chance to go and meet him and saw what his life was like in the Dominican. And so from that, we ended up, the two of us, kind of starting a charity. So I ran a charity for about 5 years until, international poverty relief, working in the Dominican Republic. And all of that came to a head in the spring of 2020 when, international travel stopped, all of our events were canceled and postponed, and all of my fundraising activities were not happening. And so I was running and meditating and running some more and meditating some more, because what else do you do when there's nothing to do? And one day I got a text from a mentor of mine, and he was being invited to Cascadia Seaweed because Cascadia Seaweed had started a year earlier building seaweed farms in partnership with coastal Indigenous First Nations communities, and realized that the best value for the seaweed that they're growing would be to launch a consumer food brand. And so my friend Carlos Zerillo, he spent his whole life at Colgate and Kraft, and he actually had launched Delissio Pizza, and then in the past few years had spent his time as a CEO of food manufacturing companies. So if you're going to launch a food brand, he's the guy to do that. But he didn't want to do it full time, and he wouldn't be the face of the brand. And he thought I would be the perfect fit because of my lifestyle. I'm plant-based and vegan. I care so much about the planet, and seaweed is arguably the most sustainable crop on the planet. And then with my work overseas in poverty relief, I really felt a calling to really kind of look into what's happening in Canada within Indigenous communities in poverty. And so, and I'm a marketing and branding person. And so, I joined as a partner in Cascadia Seaweed in the summer of 2020. And the whole job was to launch our food brand, which has now become Kove. with a K, Kove, and we're creating the tastiest, most delicious foods made from the seaweed that we're growing with First Nations all around Vancouver Island right now.
Amazing. That's such an important body of work, and I love the fact that you guys found that kind of white space, the seaweed, one of the most underutilized areas. So tell us a little more about your product and how did it all kind of come about, and how did you start working with First Nations, and a little more about the seaweed and the backstory of it.
Yeah, well, our original founder, who's now the chairman of the company, Bill Collins, he was living in Victoria and ended up doing an economic study on Vancouver Island, or like studying like the economic opportunities for Vancouver Island. And that's where he first learned about seaweed, not only the economic benefits, but the economic benefits for First Nations, because they have ownership, over like land use and water use, and also just what the impact that it could have, on the planet. Again, just growing in the ocean, requiring no land. We're not cutting down any trees. You don't have to water seaweed. So there's really very little demand on resources. And so when Bill discovered the opportunity, to start growing seaweed and build seaweed farms, he thought, well, someone really needs to do this. Like, this is really such an economic opportunity, business opportunity. And then, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, when you think of an idea, like someone should really do this. And it's like, well, I'm someone,
Right.
like I should do this. And so, yeah. And so he happened to have, contacts and friends that were like a ex-Navy guy and a Marine engineer. And so two of them, the three of them, Mike Williamson, who's now our CEO, and Tony Ethier, who's manages all of our seaweed farms. The three of them basically joined forces and co-founded the company in June 2019. And then, yeah, it was just working with existing kind of like tenures and talking to the First Nations again that have, like land and water ownership, and talking about the opportunity of seaweed to really optimize and leverage the water. And so far we have 6 different Indigenous partners. We have 7 different seaweed farms all around Vancouver Island. And most recently we partnered with the Sayout First Nation, which are just in like West Saanich, so close to our office, which is in Sydney on Vancouver Island. And literally right off the shores of Sydney is James Island. And we're working with the Sayout. We built a seaweed farm with them. And it's just, it's honestly, I'm waiting for like a problem or something like negative, because everything is just, it's like I said, like it's great for the environment. As seaweed grows, it provides nutrients to ocean life. Arguably, there's a lot of data that shows that it sequesters, up to 20 times more carbon than trees and terrestrial plants. And just the little demand on resources. And then of course, when we were able to work with our Indigenous partners, and they have ownership over some of the seaweed that we're growing as well. And so, yeah, it's really like a win-win-win situation. And so our first products, to answer your question as well, is we're working on food products in multiple categories. Our very first product is a seaweed seasoning spice. So it's just dried sugar kelp flakes that we've paired with nutritional yeast and garlic and onion and sesame seeds. So really tasty whole food ingredients that add flavor and texture to any meal, and people are loving it. We just came out with a second flavor, sriracha, and yeah, everything from avocado toast to pasta and popcorn. Someone even told me they're eating it on pizza. Anything to do with potatoes, baked potato, mashed potato, it really enhances the flavor. And again, you're not adding any like salt or other ingredients, because you get so much salt and nutritional benefit from the seaweed, things like iodine, even protein, fiber, great for gut health. And then pretty soon in the fall, we'll have our seaweed tortilla chips. We'll have a healthy seaweed protein puff that is 20% protein and 4 ingredients, and hopefully eventually some kelp burgers. And our pun is the sea's the limit when it comes to Kove food products made with Cascadia seaweed. So we're just scratching the surface, and we just started our first product, that sea spice that I mentioned, came out in February, so just a few months ago.
Right. And at the show we were putting on popcorn, right? Is that what you're putting on? Popcorn, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's great for consumer shows because we have a popcorn machine, which kind of like you can smell the popcorn and then it's really fun. Who doesn't love popcorn? And we
yeah,
found a way to like infuse it into our butter. And yeah, it's just like a really, really enjoyable experience for people to a easy way to try the seaweed seasoning and also bring people, what we like to say, bring people into the Cove, because for many people, they've never even eaten seaweed or thought about eating seaweed, because
true.
when you mention seaweed, you just think of like the slimy, sea plant that washes up on the shore that
Yeah,
you would never even consider eating, right? And so sometimes when we say, hey, do you want to try our signature seaweed seasoning or our seaweed popcorn, and they're like, seaweed, like no way. And I'm like, no, please, okay, you're the person I really want to talk to, because
totally.
I'm going to blow your mind. And then sure enough, and again, like that's what we're doing, we're making seaweed products accessible to people, because not everybody has developed a palate for seaweed, but by pairing it with tasty ingredients like garlic and onion and sesame seeds, it's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, this is actually really good, right? It brings like the umami, like salty flavor. So
It's true.
yeah.
I used mine with my tofu. I made tofu dishes and I used it with all that. Tasted super good.
Yeah, I was talking to the tofu company across the way from us is Ume, and they are a new smoked tofu company in Vancouver, amazing tofu. And we were talking about new uses for sriracha because it just came out the day before the show. And she was like, air fryer tofu with the sriracha in the air fryer with some cornstarch. And I'm like, oh, it'd be like your own homemade agadashi tofu. Like
Right,
so good.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, it's good. So so it's just such an interesting company. Now, so when you talk about seaweed, so when you go to TNT, people listening from America and North America and around the world have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's a brand of a supermarket that we got in Canada. Obviously, she's from Canada, right? So,
Yeah.
so you buy the seaweed, and I don't know the other thing. It's like the package, in the three, it says seaweed on it,
Right.
right? Is that like seaweed from where you get it?
No, most of the seaweed that is on the market, especially in TNT, is coming from Asia. So that is another reason why we have such a opportunity, is because it's very rare to find, especially at scale, like commercial products that are made with seaweed grown, from the Pacific Ocean or on the West Coast. And
Totally.
so those products, yeah, mostly coming from Asia.
Right.
And there's so many, like even in on the West Coast alone, there's I think 600 different species of seaweed. So like,
Wow.
yeah, and so even in Asia, you're talking about like different kinds. So when you say seaweed, it's kind of like an umbrella term for algae and sea vegetables. And there's, like I said, there's what we're growing is sugar kelp and alaria and dulse.
Right.
And overseas, it's usually different species or varieties of seaweed. So yeah, we're talking about a similar thing, but we're also not, right now, we're not selling just like dried seaweed. Like we're taking our seaweed and then drying it and putting it into products that are more accessible and that people would use on a regular basis, like you said, with like your tofu.
Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So
Yeah.
because I use them both, because I use that other seaweed, I like to just eat it, right?
Yeah.
It tastes good. I mean, it tastes good, right? And then I used your guys' stuff. So do you think, like you said, there's lots of seaweed and stuff. So is there a lot of companies doing this now? And could there be room for more companies to get into the space to create a better world and start using seaweed? Because it sounds like there's so much of it, or is it a real competitive market and there's just too much of there's not enough and there's way too many people doing it?
No, there is absolutely not enough people growing seaweed. And that is why I'm so proud to be part of Cascadia, because we are really doing something that is so beneficial for the planet, and we need more companies doing what we're doing. We are essentially pioneering a whole new industry with the blue economy and within aquaculture. In Asia, certainly, seaweed and seaweed farms are everywhere, but in North America and even in Europe, there's so much opportunity. Think of like our coastline, right? Like where there's
Yeah.
just so much. And like we can even grow our own company like 10x, 100x. We have the opportunity to grow in terms of like the scale that we're building out seaweed farms. And absolutely, like for it is a growing industry, especially as, you know, commercial fishing and fishing becomes more challenging and more difficult. As you know, this is like a podcast all about compassion. And if you watch you know, if anyone that becomes aware or educated and you start to, you know, watch films like Seaspiracy and just see like fish farms and commercial fishing, like, first of all, there's just like, it's becoming less and less of an opportunity because we're like, cod fishing, for example, on the east coast of Canada is basically non-existent anymore because there's just no fish left.
Wow.
And so it's kind of like what I like to say, like low hanging fruit for somebody that is already has experience and has spent some time as a fisherman or in commercial fishing to transition what they're doing to build a seaweed farm. Like, it's really low infrastructure. A seaweed farm essentially is like commercial rope and some anchors and buoys, and you know, you inoculate little seaweed babies and put them on twine and wrap them around the rope. And if you have access to water and you know, can do that. I think there's a really great book. It's called Eat Like a Fish.
Okay.
And it's by a guy named Bren Smith, and it's his story of basically, growing up on the east coast of Canada and going into the States, and his whole journey of becoming a commercial fisherman, and how insane that industry is. You know, like, again, I was never exposed to it, but when I watched even just Seaspiracy and knowing about the pirating and like, just it's like gangster life on the ocean sometimes with fishing. And so it's his story about how he went, his whole journey of his life as a commercial fisherman to then he went to oyster farming, but he had a terrible time with oyster farms because Mother Nature just didn't cooperate. And I think 2 years in a row, he basically lost his oyster farms due to nature, and then eventually found seaweed farming. And he talks about in the States, like being able to set up a seaweed farm for maybe like 90K to 120K, and be able to make like a good living and a livelihood off of a seaweed farm, because there's two parts. And like, the reason why, again, our company is different is because we're not only just building seaweed farms, but then we're also using our seaweed as an ingredient for food and growing a food brand. But
Right.
most seaweed companies, especially North America, they're either finding like wild harvested seaweed or buying, you know, wild harvested seaweed from people that are foraging the seaweed, or actually from seaweed farmers that are growing the seaweed. So it's basically like being a farmer. You're growing a crop, and then you have, you know, companies that are developing food products that you can then sell your ingredient to. And so, again, sorry, a bit long-winded because I have
No,
so
it's
much
good.
to share, but to answer your question, there is so much room. We need more people, I think, in the space just to keep advocating to the government. You know, if we had access to some of the subsidies that, you know, like dairy farmers get, or like some of these other industries, we could be doing so much good for the planet and creating really, really tasty foods that people want to enjoy.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for explaining that. I think it was really well explained. And so, if some of the viewers are not understanding a seaweed farm, give a kind of an overview what that looks like. Because I know some are probably like, you know, sitting there right now going, like, a seaweed farm, like what is that? Yeah.
It looks like nothing. Like, I would encourage you to just Google it and see what the kind of images that come up. But like, one of the images that pops out in my mind is just in one of our farms. It's kind of like in an inlet in a cove off of Vancouver Island, and all you see is like buoys. So there's maybe like 20 buoys on the water. And one of the pictures that always comes to my mind is we have all these birds. So that's what a seaweed farm looks like. It's like buoys on the water. The birds are hanging out on the buoys, and it doesn't look like anything because, again, the seaweed is on a rope, which is kind of just floating below the surface of the ocean. And like, let's say this is the rope, the seaweed is planted on the rope here, and then it just grows downward into the ocean. So like, if this is the surface of the water, all you're seeing is, you know, like the buoys that
Right.
are kind of like holding the rope, and then but the anchors and the seaweed is growing downward. So it's really not a lot to see. And then once we harvest, we have a barge and maybe like a boat, you know, pulling the seaweed out of the water. But it's really not a lot. You know, you're there's not a lot to see.
Right. So how long, so when you harvest, so from start to finish, explain that. Like, what's the timelines and stuff like that?
It's about like 8 months, I guess, maybe 8 or 9 months. So
Right.
right now our process is that because most seaweeds grow in really cold water. So we, like I said, like I've learned so much. Like I didn't even know that, you're basically inoculating little seaweed babies. And so we have a nursery, which is essentially just a shipping container where it's temperature controlled and light controlled. And the little seaweed babies are first kind of like born and put on cylinders of twine. So you just have these like little cylinders and twine of well, like, yeah, lines of twine that is wrapped around the cylinder. And then you have all these little seaweed seedlings on the twine. That right now that happens for us late summer, like August, September. Right. And then in the early fall is when we take the twine of the seaweed babies, and then the twine gets wrapped around the commercial rope, and the rope gets taken out, just is out in sea and then dropped into the water. And then typically we usually harvest like March, April. So about 5-6 months later. So the seaweed just, again, stays in the water through the winter, like cold temperatures, grows really, 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 really fast. Again, like I encourage anyone to look it up, to see pictures, because when we go out on the boat and the barge and we lift up the rope, it's just like curtain beds of gigantic lines of seaweed up to like 12 feet long potentially or more, and like these huge leaves of seaweed. So all we do is lift up the rope and cut the seaweed off, and then we further kind of process it. But yeah, so it's right now the type of seaweed we're just harvesting once a year. So it's planted in late summer, early fall, and then in the springtime taken out of the water.
So what can go wrong? Meaning, like if you're doing a farm, right? Weather, I mean, you got 100 things that are going to happen. So when it gets planted out there, like what challenges can happen? Can you get to the fact where everything is messed up and you have nothing, you go pull it up and like there's nothing there?
Yeah, there's lots of risk. Like at the end of the day, we're farmers, right? It's a crop.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
It's a crop, and it's dependent on weather and light and different things. So issues that we've come across, for example, is heavy winds and storms. And if the farm is not secured enough, then it can start to like float away. And if there's too much displacement, then obviously that's affecting, the healthiness of the actual kelp that's growing off the line. So there's loss and damage there. If we leave it in too long, because it's so nutritious for ocean life, you have creatures that all of a sudden start to like feed off of it and could eat up like too much of your crop. There's in some sites it just doesn't grow because the water's not cold enough, or there's like not enough light. So yeah, it's we've experienced that already. Like we have certain farms where we can see that the seaweed is thriving in that location, and other locations where where the environment is just not the right fit for seaweed to be happy and healthy. So of course, again, like, especially with climate change and the weather changing so much from year to year, if the water's not cold enough, or again, if there's, not enough sunlight, and the winds and the storms, and like, there's a lot. Absolutely. Right. So and that's the challenging market, is out of your control, right? Like one year we have a certain yield, and the next year it could vary and nothing to do with our process or anything like that. So that's that from a business perspective is a little bit challenging, because there's variables and levers that you can't necessarily control.
Right. How about rules and regulations and restrictions and all that stuff? Is it too new of an industry now where it's almost kind of like the NFT market where there's regulations?
There's certainly not too many regulations, but there is definitely, like, the biggest thing is permitting and licensing, and having access to the water, and being granted that permit to grow seaweed. And that is the biggest barrier to entry. And that is, again, something that we're trying to work hand in hand with the provincial and federal governments to make that process easier, because it is such an opportunity for people to get into this industry. And again, whether it's a small farm that they're creating for themselves, or like a scalable company that they want to grow, like what we're doing with Cascadia. But so the permitting is the biggest, just even
Right.
being allowed the rights to kind of like, again, like put out the buoys and build a farm essentially.
Right. So do you have to, so is it like, this is, I don't know if this is gonna be an interesting question. It's either gonna make me sound really, really not smart or smart. So is it like city? Do you go to the city and get like it's like a permit thing? Like actually the city
Yeah,
grant?
provincial.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's basically, it's like similar to like a fishing license, or like it's a licensing process. And again,
Right.
like we are also, and typically it's, the First Nations have tenure of on that land and access to the water, and so it's usually working hand in hand. As a part of the tenure that they have, where again, something that we're working on is to have marine plants and algae as a part of that tenure, and as a part of that permitting already in hand. So if First Nation already has, let's say, like a aquaculture license where they can have a fish farm or commercial fishing, that already the marine plants and the seaweed is kind of like already within
Got it.
that, where it's not right now. And so that application process is lengthy.
Right.
Yeah.
So I said that's how you guys almost surpassed that, then I would think, to partner with the Indigenous people. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And but it's still like, even hand in hand with them, overcoming jurisdictions and
Right.
that we have to work with, with the provincial and federal governments, because there's even, yeah, it's very complicated, to be honest. That part of it is as easy as I make it sound, like, oh yeah, everyone needs to be getting into farming, and I'm not too familiar with what's happening in the States. It seems like it's probably a little bit easier, the whole process. But for us, that is definitely something that, for us, like we have the opportunity to build much larger and many more locations, but like the permitting and the licensing and that is the barrier. It takes like months, if not, like a year or two
Yeah.
to get through. So
I'm surprised that they're not trying to move that faster, because that's what's gonna, if more people get in,
mhm.
gonna, cut down, the fishing and all that. I mean, it just to me makes sense to start maneuvering that way. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, us too. Yeah. Especially if, our governments want to be advocates for climate change, economic opportunities that are healthy and abundant for individuals, for communities, and growing a crop that is really good for the environment. And again, transitioning out of fish farms and commercial fishing, because there are legislations now where fish farms have been, have to be removed. And so, okay, well, what are these people supposed to do? Right. And like I said earlier, like seaweed is such like an easy thing for them to parlay into. But yeah, that process, again, working with the government, needs to speed up. And hopefully, if anyone is listening, we're definitely championing for this industry, and just to help ourselves and help anyone else that wants to get into it, because it is such an opportunity.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those opportunities where it I think it's such a great opportunity, because it's one of those things where, we don't really look at that much. I always feel like in the last, in change in environmental change, or even veganism and different things, it's almost like anything to do with the ocean and fish and that stuff. It's kind of the last thing that's almost looked at. Like people don't understand, like you see, people don't understand, well, like, what do you mean I can't not eat fish? Or what do you mean I can, like they just don't even think about that at all. And because I never even heard about the show that you just said until today in my last meeting with no, it wasn't him, it was somebody else, but they just brought that up, that Netflix show. What's it called again?
Seaspiracy.
Yeah, I got to watch that tonight. Seaspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's eye-opening. I think because the ocean is so vast and you don't necessarily see it personally all the time. Like you
Right.
see the images of like garbage and, like the great, plastic and all
Yeah.
of that kind of thing. And so like people are hugely advocating for straws and single-use plastics and things, types of things, because that's what you see. But a movie like Seaspiracy is really eye-opening as to like, just the impact of because you don't see, you think of fishing and you think of like a guy in a canoe fishing for some fish, like you don't understand like the trolley nets that are like scraping the bottom of the ocean, and like just all the bycatch and the impact, like just the devastation that comes from the fishing industry. And so
Right.
even for myself, I think because people also, like, you can see when people stop eating meat, like cows and pigs and land animals are, I don't know, they're almost like just next to like your pet, right? Like they're not that far off from like your dog or whatever. So you can kind of make the relation. Whereas when you think of like fish or tuna, like even for myself, like I don't even think I could picture what a tuna looked like when I used to eat tuna or fish. And even when I stopped eating fish, because my vegan journey went from vegan to kind of like vegetarian and never dairy, but like pescatarian with some fish, because I just didn't really even understand. I didn't relate, again, like a tuna to a cow. But then when I learned about the environmental impact, I think it was from Cowspiracy, and then I was like starting to understand, like, the ocean agriculture industry has a massive impact on the health of the planet. And that's when it really like honed in on me, like, okay, like I cannot keep including this as a part of my diet, because just as much as animal agriculture is devastating our planet, like the ocean agriculture is doing it in a different way. And so, I think that people have to actively kind of educate themselves on what's happening to our oceans and how food is being manufactured. And like I said, like a little bit earlier with like bycatch, and it's like millions of dolphins and sharks and like that we're losing because they're trying to catch tuna or salmon or cod, but along the way, all of these other animals are being killed or dying also because they don't have their food to eat anymore either. So it's very complex, but I think people are starting, again, with things like Netflix and the internet and social media, it's like you can't avoid a lot of this information anymore. And people kind of want to still turn a blind eye a little bit because they like their sashimi, but there's just so many, you saw it planted, like there's just so many better options now that where they're, if you can make a tuna sashimi out of watermelon or tomato, like why wouldn't you choose that option? And like that's what we're trying to do with seaweed too, is also like replace certain foods. And like the more we invest in this industry and we can like work on R&D, and like the sky is the limit with seaweed, like even from a food perspective, but also from a bioplastics perspective. Like people are making packaging now from seaweed, and it's just it's unbelievable where it can go.
That's amazing. Have you ever eaten at one of the sushi places that's just all like it's no fish anymore? There's a couple in LA.
Yeah, there's a couple in Vancouver as well.
Is it like it's just sushi, but it's not sushi?
Yeah, and lots of rolls too, right? Like so, so they'll.
Which one? I didn't know that. What is it?
I think it's called Ogenki in Vancouver. Ogenki. Yeah, they're vegan. And it's like tomato based, different types of, and then like the carrot locks. So there's a company, you might have seen them at Planted Save to See. They do smoked salmon made of carrots. And so, they have these different types of sashimis, but also like just like the rolls, again, because you can have vegan mayo and you can torch it with jalapenos and the avocados and tempura and yum, and like, like it's,
Right. What's the name of that again in Vancouver?
Ogenki. Ogenki, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that one was here.
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 of them. Yeah.
Check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So did you guys do a raise to start?
Yeah, we've done several. So you'll start with like friends and family, seed round, and then we've done one raise. And then now we're just closing a second raise, which is about 2.5 million.
Right.
So
cool. So 2.5 million. So where are you guys? So are you guys, obviously you're going to keep raising after this one and then keep another couple rounds after?
Yeah, I think after this one kind of closes, we'll be looking at doing one like major raise, which will be a bigger like 5 to 10 million round. as we like really launch our food brand. And then we have a couple other verticals that we're working on as well. So yeah, at least one more big round after this one. So we've got a couple of really key investors that have come on in the last round. And so I think that with them and where we're at with like, as we get food products in market and stuff like that, the valuation continues to increase. So it's exciting.
Right. What's the biggest challenge of where you guys are at right now?
There's a couple. Like one of them is just definitely being like a brand new industry, like on the west coast of Canada, no one is really growing seaweed like we are and processing it into commercial food products. And so we have to figure out everything, like not just building farms and growing seaweed, but then what do you do when you take the seaweed out of the water and like the further processing, so like washing it or blanching it and then drying it into a powder or a flake or like that. There's a whole processing system there, manufacturing that. There's no primary processors of seaweed. Like I always say, like right now we're lucky to find a guy in the lower mainland here in Vancouver and Chilliwack, and we caught him between like cherry season and apple season and just gave him as much seaweed as we could. But then you're working with a third party processor, so that's adding cost to your supply chain. And then from there, usually we're working with contract manufacturers that are like, right now we're working with tortilla chips, right? So we take our seaweed powder and then we work with a contract manufacturer who already does chips, but they create like a new version for us with as seaweed chips. But finding those manufacturers is extremely difficult. And I hate to say it because it's so annoying, but like COVID is just throwing a wrench in everything, because there's so many, like in BC, you have a lot of like small scale producers and they're having struggles with like capacity and labor and resources. And so that impacts us, because then our timelines are, like pushed out longer and longer because they don't have capacity. And then things like packaging, supply chain, we wanted to do our sea spice in glass bottles, and the only supplier we could find because of COVID was in South Africa. And then again, with like shipping containers, it was going to take 10 months, or took like 10 months to get the glass bottles from like, it's like year, like 48-week lead times to get certain like supplies. And so yeah, if you're talking to anybody in the food industry, you'll just keep hearing like supply chain. And it's like, again, it's like super annoying because, here we are like over 2 years since COVID started, and it's just all of the ramifications of that are just creating huge bottlenecks and problems. So yeah, it's kind of twofold. It's like being a new industry and having to develop all of the different processing to all of the impacts of COVID and supply chain and having access and capacity and resources and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's definitely challenging on the brand side. That's because that's where I live day in, day out. And of course there's other challenges with growing seaweed and building out the farms. Like I said, like some of the struggles with licensing and permitting and getting access to where we want to build farms and grow seaweed is also another challenge that we are continually overcoming. And yeah.
Right, makes sense. So is the goal to do an exit eventually, or
yeah, I mean, eventually I think we're further away from that, just because we're still setting up so many things. Maybe in a couple of years. I know there was mention previously of a public offering potentially, but I think we've decided to hold off at least for another year before that conversation is going to get brought up again. And depending on like the next round and how that goes, I'm sure some of the team definitely would like to see an exit sooner than later, but whether that's in an acquisition or an IPO or what have you, I'm definitely here for a long time. I want to build out our seaweed farms. Our brand has I think can be a massive brand. We're doing something so new and so unique, and people are loving what we're doing. So yeah, I would love to see the brand around for a very long time with my involvement. And yeah.
Amazing. Well, you guys are doing amazing work. So congratulations on everything you're doing. It's not an easy task to start a new industry pretty much. And then you're right with COVID and figuring everything out, it's a lofty challenge, but it's also a challenge that has to be taken on in the world if we want to leave this environment and leave the world better for the next generations. It's just it has to be done.
We have to look at new sources of food. We can't continue to cut down trees. We can't continue to eat animals the way that we're doing. Our population is set to grow to, 10 billion people in the next like 20, 30 years. And the ocean can provide so much opportunity. I've heard of people that are actually starting to grow rice in the ocean. And so, ocean, like aquaculture and ocean farming is, I think, again, just like the tip of the iceberg that we've just scratched the surface. And absolutely, like in terms of the way that we're innovating, vehicles and how we're driving and how like packaging, like we have to look at our foods and we have to start innovating in new ways to feed ourselves. And so I think that's why this work is extremely important, and is why like you said in my bio, like I want to put my time and energy while I'm alive on this planet towards things that actually matter and like meaningful, impactful work. And so hopefully what I'm doing will matter and like, inspire other people to either like see about eating seaweed or get into the seaweed industry, or even other innovative ways that involve the ocean that we haven't even considered. But yeah, for sure.
Right. So last tip for somebody, you just said if somebody was going to get in, where would you advise them to start looking?
I mean, the internet is such a great resource. So I would definitely listen to that Brent Smith, Eat Like a Fish, do some Google research, and send us an email, info@Cascadia Seaweed. We'd love to point you in the right direction. There's the Safe Seaweed Coalition. They have a lot of information and resources on seaweed, and they're based out of Europe. So they kind of have like a global look on it. And follow us. We're on Instagram @Kove Ocean or @Cascadia Seaweed, and always really easy to get a hold of, and happy to share as many resources as possible.
Thank you. That's amazing. And where can they, because your one product is out now, right? The one SKU's out, just came out, correct?
Our first SKU just came out. Our second flavor just came out like a week ago. And our very first SKU came out like 3 months ago. And we're online, koveocean.com. Again, that's with a K, and we ship for free if you order 3 or more bottles. So free shipping in North America. I'm not sure if where your listeners are, but we're mostly, in terms of retail, we're mostly just in the greater Vancouver, Okanagan area and Vancouver Island in BC independent retailers. But again, by the fall or end of the year, we should be looking across Canada, and hopefully by next year going into the States. But absolutely, follow us along. Just go to our website, Kove Ocean. If you subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get all the latest updates, and you'll be the first to see like our products, and they're always available first on our website. So yeah.
Awesome. I would go definitely try their products. I've had them. I love them. They're super good. So keep doing what you're doing. And thank you so much for this wonderful interview. It's definitely a space that we don't talk a lot about. It's not like every day I'm getting somebody on to talk about the seaweed in the ocean, of building company around it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, thank you for allowing me to share our story, and hopefully some of your listeners will research and learn more, and we'll continue to spread the word about the super crop. And thank you so much for having me, Shane. I'm really grateful to be here. And again, just to keep spreading the compassion movement in new ways, and opening people's eyes and making it more accessible to choose compassionate choices and live a kinder way.
There, we'll leave it at that, because that was a perfect ending. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.